What is going on, guys? Once again, thank you for entering the chamber. Today we're going to be taking a look at Agents of Destruction, often referred to as AOD for short. Agents of Destruction have been a deck that have been floating around the edges of the game for some time, and they recently got some love back in the 2020 anniversary box to bring them up to a more modern power level. They're a relatively aggressive deck that have a fallback plan where they can grind their opponent out, since all of your agents produce value when they are played. Let's get started with the leader. So, he has a permanent that says that you ignore the specified costs on all of your AOD. This is useful, except we have a battle card that replicates this effect, but still on occasion, if we can't find that card or keep it alive, it's nice that the leader just always does this. He has an auto on swing to optionally take a life, and then check your top 5 for any agent of your choice. Fairly simple. His Awaken, 4 lives or less, draw 1, untap 1, and he turns into Majin Buu, leader of the Agents of Destruction. So this leader is kind of weird on his Awaken side, because for starters, he doesn't draw when he attacks, but instead he has the ability to play any agent from your hand that costs 2 or less. Now normally, this would have a very limited range of targets since most of our agents cost 3, but there's a battle card we're going to get to in just a little bit that reduces the cost of all of our agents by 1 in our hand, so this guy can basically for free play 1 agent a turn, meaning how you spend your energy is usually pretty free. He also has an extra activate main that says you can pay 3 energy and play any AOD unison, which allows us to cheat on the specified costs of the requirements on our unison as well, since this is once again a rainbow deck. To start us off, we have 4 copies of Bobbity, Overseer Destruction. This guy is the heart and soul of the deck. He's a 1-drop with barrier. He has the same permanent that our leader has that makes it so that we don't have to pay the specified cost of our cards. And then he has an additional permanent that makes all of our AOD 1 cheaper in our hand. He's pretty much the most important card of the deck, and he's a card you should aggressively mulligan for when you're trying to sculpt out your opening hand. To help make the deck more consistent, we also play 4 copies of Hatchiac, Vengeful Agent of Destruction. Hatchiac is a 20k beater that has an activate main where you can pay an energy and discard him and find a Bobbity anywhere in either your deck or your drop area. So, for starters, he's effectively Bobbity's copy 5 through 8. So if you have one of these in your hand, it's like having a Bobbity. In addition, if he gets played, you can warp one of your opponent's battle cards that cost 4 energy or less, and then take up to 3 battle cards from your opponent's drop area and put them on the bottom of their deck. This is occasionally useful against decks that are really reliant on the drop area, like Dark Broly or Sin Shenron, but for the most part, we just run Hatchiac to fetch our Bobbity. It's really important when building this deck, and if you choose to play it, in your opening hand, you should mulligan for one of these or one of these very aggressively, because this deck doesn't work very well if it doesn't find one of these cards. Next, one of the most important support pieces of the deck, we have 4 copies of the Agents of Destruction Strike Back. So, this card is free with Bobbity out, since it has a permanent that says it counts as an Agent of Destruction in all areas, even though it's an extra card. You get to look at the top 2 cards of your deck and add any AOD that you find and put all non-AOD at the bottom of your deck. If you find a card to put in your hand, you can take a life, so it's also a self-awakener tool. We run 34 different AODs in this deck, counting this card itself. So this card is often just hits 2 agents at the top of our deck and is effectively a free energy to draw 2 and optionally take a life. Very, very, very good card. Getting into the agents, to start we have a full playset of Turles, Chaotic Agent of Destruction. Turles is our actual incremental card advantage in this deck because, again, our leader doesn't actually draw when he attacks once he's awakened. So, to keep the card advantage flowing, we have Turles here. He's a 15k with barrier and unique, and he simply says that when he attacks, he does the same ability as our leader, where you check the top 5 and you may add any agent. So, Turles helps us keep a fresh stock of agents and can find us specific agents that we need to solve situations on board. Getting to what is probably the best agent in the deck, we have 4 copies of Broly, Invincible AOD. Broly is a 20k beater that when he comes down, he KOs any battle card that costs 5 or less, and then he checks the top 3 for any card, and you get to put it in your hand. The other 2 go to the drop area. What's cool about Broly is that he doesn't care what kind of card you search, period, which is important because in this deck, a lot of our draw effects specifically grab agents. The leader's front side only grabs agents, Turles only grabs agents, AOD Strike Back can only grab agents, you get the idea. So Broly being able to check the top 3 and add anything, you know, a non-agent, an agent, your SCR if you find it, means he can find you cards that you normally struggle to draw in this deck. On top of that, KOing 5 or less hits quite a few battle cards in this format, so he's just all around a great card. As far as our boss monster goes, we run 3 copies of Vegeta Resolute, Agent of Destruction. So, Vegeta is a 20k critical double strike unison. That normally takes 4 green energy to play, but again, our leader can simply just pay 3 and play any unison with 3 markers on it, so we can get around that cost quite easily. He has a +1 that gives him an extra 5k power, so he swings at 25 double strike critical, which is nice. And then, in theory, if the game goes long, he has a -5 where we can rip 3 cards out of our opponent's hand. But usually the games with this deck tend to go kind of fast, and you rarely get to the -5. He's really just in here because he clears our opponent's board when he comes down. He's a rather large threat at offensively 25 double strike critical, and he's difficult to remove since he's a 20k unison. Getting into our more utility and defensive agents, we have a playset of Garlic Jr., Immortal Agent of Destruction. So, Garlic is a negate that when you negate an attack, he comes down and plays, and then you play an agent from your deck that costs 2 or less. Your main target for this is your Agent of Destruction super combo, which we'll get to later. But if you don't have a Turles, you can grab a Turles from your deck as well. And in an emergency, you can grab the next card we're going to talk about if you have no other targets. But he's mostly just here as a negate that then turns into a 15k body. Our other kind of defensive tech is our 3 copies of Android 13 Exterminating AOD. He's a hard printed 2, so he can also be played off of Garlic Jr. If you really just need to find any kind of target, which is an extra perk to him. He's primarily in here though because he counterplays anything that costs 3 or less, which puts the card in the drop area, and then will play Android 13 and make your opponent discard a card. So there's a lot of card advantage to 13 when he successfully goes off. As an added perk, when he gets played, you can add up to 2 AOD in your drop area and put him back in your deck. So you can recur things like AOD Strike Back, Turles, your AOD super combos. He's just a very well-rounded and flexible card that does a couple different things for us. Now, let's get into our more utility-focused agents. To begin with, we have 2 copies of Bojack AOD. Bojack is another 20k beater, but when he gets played, you can rest mode one of your opponent's battle cards, ignoring barrier, which means he's very useful for us to give us a tool to remove like random barrier sticklers that other decks might have a hard time removing and just have to deal with. In addition, he has an activate main where we can pay 2 energy and rest mode our opponent's leader, and in addition it can't go back to active mode until the end of our opponent's next turn, effectively locking them out of their leader for a turn. Very, very, very powerful effect against decks like Reboot Hit or Reboot Gohan, where they're really reliant on their leader to do most of the heavy lifting. Next, we have 2 copies of Android 13 AOD, just regular AOD. This guy's a 20k critical threat, which is occasionally useful if we want to slowly grind our opponent out, which is sometimes the best line of play for this deck. But he's mostly in here for his activate main, where we can pay 2 energy, and then KO one of our opponent's battle cards, and then make them discard a card. We don't really have a lot of ways to remove big threats in this deck. Most of our KO and destroy effects are hard capped at like lower energy costs. So this guy gives us an option to, you know, kill bigger threats like a 9-drop Sin Shenron, or like a 6-drop Dark Broly, or other 6-drop against Dark Broly if we just need to really remove a threat. For our last techie agent, we run 2 copies of Lord Slug AOD. Slug on his own isn't very good, as he's just another 20k beater that when he comes out makes our opponent discard a card, with no other like combat stats or tricks. But he's in here because he has an activate main where we can pay a single green energy and play 1 Slug's army that costs 3 or less. And the target we run for that is 3 copies of Lord Slug Namekian Might. This is a card that came out in Draftbox 6, and is very, very good in this deck because we can effectively play it for just 1 green energy, since we can use our leader ability to play Slug for free, and then to use Lord Slug's ability to play out this guy for just a single green energy. What this guy does is that while he's in rest mode, our opponent can't add cards from their deck to their hand other than by leader skills. So super combos don't work, search effects don't work, cards that would draw cards don't work, none of it works. On top of that, he's a 20k with barrier, so he's actually somewhat difficult to remove as well. So if we open with a copy of this card or find it, it's very, very easy for us to get a hold of our Lord Slug AOD, since we have so much search in the deck. So we only run 2 copies of the enabler and 3 copies of the target. Getting into our more just generic extra card, not AOD support, we run 3 copies of Senzu Bean. We have some spare blue charges in this deck, so it makes Senzu Bean an easy inclusion for us. Especially because a lot of our counterplays and negates cost exactly 1 energy, and Senzu Bean effectively untapping energy means it's easier for us to translate that single energy to extra plays very easily. On top of that, giving our leader an extra 5k on defense can help us against a lot of rogue strategies. It's a little iffy against meta decks since they tend to swing at such large values right now, but an extra 5k still helps. Now, as I said before, we have a hard time removing larger threats in this deck, so we run 2 copies of Max Power Kamehameha mainboard. Theoretically, it's an extra recursive negate if we really need a negate in a certain matchup. But it's primarily here for its activate main to simply warp an opponent's battle card with energy greater than the current energy. So we can remove large troublesome threats that maybe we don't have a good way to get rid of otherwise. Next, we run 1 FTC. Most of the cards in this deck are single strikers, so it can be kind of difficult to actually like kill our opponent. So having an option to just hand something double strike on like a final critical swing can help us, you know, clinch a game that we really need just a little bit more push to clear. Talking super combos, we run 2 copies of Lord Slug, Mighty Agent of Destruction, and 2 copies of Temporal Rescue Trunks. This super combo here can be literally any black super combo that you want. It doesn't really matter, as long as it draws you a card. This guy, on the other hand, is searchable off of Garlic Jr., despite being a 2-drop super combo, so you can effectively fetch your super combos with this deck, and recur them with the Android 13 auto. He also has an extra ability that while he's in play, if our opponent activates a counterplay skill, they have to discard 2 cards as like an additional cost. So he makes it a little bit easier for us to play and engage the board if we're worried about things like a God Sealing Trunks or a Charismatic Villain. Just an all-around great card, but we only run 2 since again he's searchable and recursive. And then finally, the SCR, the money card for the deck, we run Cell X. I mean, this card's dumb. There's not a whole lot to say here. It's a 40k quad strike, We have a lot of green and yellow cards, so it's very easy to get to exactly 12 since everything costs 3 or 2. He comes down for no energy, and often when our opponent thinks they have another turn and they've got 3 or 4 lives left, you can just clear your own board and hit him with this and end the game pretty much on the spot. There's not much to say, really. It's an expensive card. You don't need it, but if you have it, it's really, really good in the deck. So that completes our actual deck profile for Agents of Destruction. Now we're going to spend a minute and talk about what you can do when you find yourself playing against Agents of Destruction. AOD have 2 major weaknesses. The first being that they're very predictable. As I said before, this deck runs almost 35 agents, and there's only so many agents to actually pick and pull from. So once you kind of learn what the different agents do, you kind of know everything that the deck can do. There's not a lot of room for like tech or crazy spice. Not that there's no room, just not a lot. So usually once you know what like an Agent of Destruction deck does, you kind of know how to play around it, and you'll stop falling for things like having plays get hit by Android 13, things like that. And that's the thing that kind of hurts the deck because it's very straightforward and obvious for what it's trying to do. The other big weakness it has is that it's very vulnerable to extra card floodgates. Things like Sensu Bean, for giving us an extra 5k, can put a lot of our swings out of reach. Flying Nimbus can make it very difficult for us to push damage through since we rely on hitting our opponent with a bunch of battle card attacks. DPU shuts our turn down almost entirely. Effects like that, they make it very difficult for us to actually get in and push for big damage. A third thing that you can try to do, it's difficult, but you can try and remove the Bobbity. Most of our agents cost 3, so when Bobbity dies, our leader ability will only play 2s or less, which is like our counterplays and Turles, who's unique, so he doesn't play very much. The reason this isn't like a great thing to go for is, first of all, Bobbity has barrier, and he never attacks, so he can be difficult to remove. But the other thing is that Hatchiac plays Bobbities from deck or drop area, and good Agent of Destruction players will just hold onto a Hatchiac just in case you kill Bobbity. So in that case, they just use 1 energy and they get another Bobbity back, and they're right back at full throttle. So against good agent players, killing their Bobbity doesn't really slow them down very much. It costs them 1 energy basically, and that's it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do that if you can, it's just not a crippling game-ending effect. The main thing to look out for, though, is thinking about what agents they might have available and not trying to play into like most of their basic destruction effects. Not playing into Android 13, and then digging really hard for any kind of like hard turn stops. Because AOD typically don't want to play a longer game, so buying yourself time and taking turns from them really hurts the deck. Still, they're a good, budget-friendly, reasonably competitive deck that you can pay some money and spruce up if you want to, but if you don't, you can keep them quite budget actually. Probably less than $100 for mostly a deck in foil. You can have a good time with it. They're a good intro, beginner-friendly deck that you still have room to grow as a player. So there's something you should definitely test out on Untap or buy for yourself and give it a shot. If you like this deck profile and tips for playing with and against Agents of Destruction, please consider giving us a like or a follow on Facebook, and if you would be so gracious, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to have a lot more deck profiles like this, gameplay footage, card and deck analyses, the whole 9. So once again, guys, thank you for entering the chamber, and we'll see you in the next one.